Ladies and gentlemen, John Panette.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much. Wow, this better be good, huh? Yes. It's a pleasure to be here. I went to the gym today. Listen first. First, listen. Since February, I've been going to the gym 5 or 6 days a week. I don't like it. I go because I want to be healthier. I have such a long road ahead of me. I lost 100 pounds, and people say to me, wow, we can really see it in your face. How big was my head before I started this journey? Apparently, I was the Kool-Aid man. Nobody ever said anything to me. Oh, yeah, Kool-Aid's here. That's John. His head's the size of a manhole cover. We don't talk about it, though. Shh. And it's not like I'm getting back in shape. Oh, getting back in shape? No, I never was in shape. So in February, I hired a trainer. I've had many since then. Some quit. Some turned to drugs and alcohol. One trainer quit the business and opened up a candy store. Seriously. He makes the best maple walnut fudge I've ever tasted. So I'm not just big, I'm a carrier. People get big around me. Then the trainer says to me, you know, you're tired now, you're a little sore from working out, but once you start, you get addicted. I don't think so. I think I can quit this gym stuff anytime I want. I got a lot of willpower. See that guy with the muscles over there? That's not gonna be me. They're never gonna find me in the exercise wing of Betty Ford. I can't stop! I wanna stop, but I can't stop.
Good morning. It's Saturday, June the 10th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, the rape of the mind, and I, the jury. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam.
Thank you. And now there's No Free Lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Human flourishing. I wish to preach not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of the strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, of labor and strife. To preach that highest form of success which comes not to the man who desires mere easy peace, but to the man who does not shrink from danger, from hardship, or from bitter toil, and who out of these wins the splendid ultimate triumph. Theodore Roosevelt. If I could only leave readers of this book with one message on the glory of free enterprise, it would not be about monetary policy, tax rates, supply and demand, or marginal utility. All of those things matter, and all of them plus so much more will be addressed throughout this book. But the main thing is this: the human flourishing that feeds the soul of mankind through earned success. In this sense, I write not merely about the system of market-based economics or even its societal value. I write about the existential value to human beings that comes from freedom, from adversity, and from the freedom to conquer adversity. Our faith in freedom does not rest on the foreseeable results in particular circumstances, but on the belief that it will, on balance, release more forces for the good than for the bad. F.A. Hayek. Human flourishing is the goal in a free and virtuous society, but utopian perfection is not. In this distinction may exist the key issue separating the most ghastly of failed economic visions from the one that has unleashed the most prosperous results in world history. An acceptance of imperfectibility is vital if we are to flourish. We cannot cut off the forces of good that can permeate far and wide for the long term, because we do not like the result in an isolated and narrow situation in the short term.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested political priorities? Number 1, the abolition of abortion throughout the land. Number 2, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Number 3, immediate decertification of all public employee unions. 4, the immediate assignment of criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. Number 5, the immediate repeal of the so-called Patriot Act. Number 6, the immediate repeal of all emergency dictator laws. Number 7, the reinstatement of writs of outlawry. 8, government-sponsored recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 9, a flexible minimum wage. 10, means-tested health care. 11, the immediate and permanent prohibition of investment banking by any office holder. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households, integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Chapter 14. The turncoat in each of us. The confusing influence of the problem of treason and loyalty. As soon as treason is mentioned, something in man's soul is stirred. Anger and scorn, suspicion and anxiety are aroused, and people want to avoid the subject. The social reaction toward a traitor, even before we are certain that the accusation is deserved, is very spectacular. Former friends of a man accused as a traitor retreat and withdraw from this token of evil. In every trial of traitors, we feel inwardly, personally accused and guilty. This is one of the reasons that treason trials make such a deep impression and provoke the most confusing discussions. Dictators can use such trials to cast a spell on the public. In a book on mental coercion and the rape of the mind, an investigation of the problem of treason and loyalty is needed. The involuntary traitor. Self-betrayal comes out of all human pores. Sigmund Freud. In my hometown in Holland, there was a little barber shop quite near the government buildings. It was owned by a small man with a gray French beard. Through the years, he'd served many of the country's most important men, diplomats and cabinet ministers, proud generals and aggressive leaders of the opposition. They all wanted his service. The little barber was always very courteous and agreeable, eager to please his clients. He danced with prim, servile gestures around them while curling their hair and looking after their mustaches. As he worked, he would ask his distinguished clients polite questions. What is His Excellency so-and-so going to say about this bill? How does the Minister of State feel about that one? He was not really interested in politics at all, but the little barber knew that his clients were flattered by such questions. And then one day, a puffy, beribboned German general walked in and settled himself in the barber's chair. The Netherlands had been invaded and occupied by the Nazi hordes. Of course, our barber knew this, and he had even managed to hate the invaders for a few days. But he was innately a genteel soul, and he lathered the general's face himself and took care not to soil his uniform. On succeeding days, others of these strangely uniformed men appeared in his shop, and the little barber served them all well. The military men were followed by the brown shirts, and then the green shirts of the Gestapo. The leather of the barber's chair was scuffed by the large black boots, but the little barber did not complain. And soon the occupiers considered his haircut the most fashionable and best that could be obtained in the entire city. Our barber was not too conscious of his increasing official importance. He danced attendance on his new clients with as much courtesy as he'd showed the diplomats of the old days. He was sorry that his old acquaintances had gradually disappeared, but in the past his work had been seasonal. When Parliament was not in season, his shop had been empty. Now his business flourished all the time. The Germans and the collaborators liked the little barber shop, the perfume, the barber's skill. Indeed, our amiable friend was well liked by the uniformed oppressors. They were, after all, thoroughly unused to friendly treatment. The barber's behavior was a welcome change from the contempt with which most of the Dutch people, those stupid, stubborn resistors, regarded them. One day the barber was invited to buy a membership card in a newly formed organization of collaborators. Our friend responded to this request as he would have to any other appeal for charity. He did not like to give, but he thought of welfare as a special tax on business. And so he resigned himself to paying as a petty, necessary annoyance. Some of his old acquaintances warned him of the consequences. He would be accused of collaboration and treason. But he pacified them by saying, I am a barber and I live as a barber. I have absolutely no interest in politics. I only want to serve my clients. When, after the bitter years of struggle and oppression, liberation came, our friend became officially known as a traitor and a collaborator. When the black-booted uniformed supermen were thrown out, their collaborating friends were imprisoned, the barber among them. After he had served a part of his sentence, a wise and forgiving judge sent our barber back to his little shop. The first excitement of liberation had passed, and people were becoming more willing to forgive those who had been collaborators because they had been weak-hearted. Our story is by no means finished. The barber came back from prison a beaten man. He had been in jail for 3 months. He could not understand what had happened to him. He brooded constantly over his shameful days in jail. An injustice had been done to him. He had served his fellow man as a well-behaved, virtuous citizen should, and he had been treated like a criminal. He felt self-righteous, abused, insulted, maltreated, and misunderstood. After all, he'd only wanted to be kind and helpful. He was a barber, nothing more. The barber could not rid himself of his bitterness and resentment. None of his former friends came to cheer him up or to sympathize with him. His old client did not return. His sadness and depression increased daily, and in a few months, he took his own life. And so ended the adventures of the little barber who had been completely unaware of his collaboration and his treachery. I knew this man. I do not despise him, not at all. I am sure there were many such pitiful collaborators. I wonder, though, why the little barber was so unaware. Was it stupidity? Had his apparent kindness always covered up a resentment against his fellow men? Was he misled by an insidious wave of suggestion stronger than his mental capacity to resist? We will never know. This tragedy, caused perhaps by unawareness, perhaps by the inability to choose between conflicting loyalties, stimulated me to investigate the problem of the traitor. I had ample opportunity to study this question, both through my experiences with the Dutch underground during the Nazi occupation and when I was imprisoned in a Vichy detention camp. My first official analysis was made in 1943, when the Dutch government asked me to prepare a psychological report on disloyal Dutch soldiers and citizens being held in detention on the Isle of Man. I arrived at the prison after a hazardous, stormy journey in a small airplane. The prisoners were a sorry lot. I had anticipated hostility, but I had not expected to find so many weaklings, consumed by bitterness and anger. Some of them were typical of the passive, egotistic, psychopathic personality, whose motto seems to be, "Let the world go to hell, I will never conform." Others seemed to be the victims of an unbearable inner struggle, a conflict between their desire to belong to the stronger group and their resistance to this desire, a resistance which only increased their bitterness and antagonism. This was a situation which proved to me again that there are certain times when logic and discussion are no help at all. We tried over and over again to convince the semi-collaborators that they should join with us in the fight against the Nazis, but they only retreated further behind their private grudges. They even refused the cigarettes I offered them. Bad as the trip to the prison had been, the trip back was even worse. The little plane was pushed off course by strong winds. I was depressed and disgusted by my experiences, and when we finally arrived in England, both the pilot and I were sick. I had many opportunities thereafter to study spies, traitors, and subversives. My last official wartime investigation took me to a prison camp in Suriname, Dutch Guinea, where I made a collective report on all the inhabitants of the prison camp. In many of them, I could discern neurotic and even psychotic traits. But I have found that perhaps the best understanding of the problem of treason has come to me from my psychiatric work with neurotic patients who have to face a daily struggle with the little betrayals of everyday life, with their own self-betrayal, and with their ambivalent feelings toward those they should love.
And that was The Rape of the Mind, The Involuntary Traitor by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, I, the Jury, by Mickey-Spillane, and it's about Mike Hammer, private detective. And so far, in the first 3 chapters, Mike Hammer was invited to a crime scene where one of his best friends had been shot and killed. And so Hammer, at that particular point, who's a detective, wanted everybody to know that he's going to find the killer and kill the killer. So, and the police department said that they are bound and determined to get to the killer before Mike Hammer does. And so that set the stage for the book. They're both in a race to find the killer. The police have put a tail on Mike Hammer, and in the last chapter, Mike Hammer succeeded in losing his tail. So here it is, chapter 4 of Mickey-Spillane's Mike Hammer in I, the Jury.
Chapter 4. The anteroom was ultra-modern, but well-appointed. Chairs that looked angular were really very comfortable. Whoever decorated the interior had a patient's mental comfort well in mind. The walls were an indescribable shade of olive, cleverly matched with a dull finished set of drapes. The windows admitted no light. Instead, the soft glow came from hidden bulbs installed directly into the wall. On the floor, an ankle-thick carpet muffled any sound of footsteps. From somewhere came the muted tones of a string quartet. I could have fallen asleep right there if the secretary who had given me the telephone brush-off didn't motion me over to the desk. From her tone, it was evident that she knew I was no patient. With a full day's growth of beard and the wrinkled ruin of a suit I had on, I was lower than the janitor in her estimation. She inclined her head toward the door behind her and said, "Miss Manning will see you now. Please go in," with special emphasis on the please. When I went past her, she drew back slightly. "Don't worry, honey," I told her out of the corner of my mouth. "I won't bite. This is just a disguise." I yanked open the door and went in. She was better than her picture. She was delicious. There was a lot about her that couldn't be put into words. Charlotte Manning was sitting at her desk, hands folded in front of her, as if she were listening for something. Beautiful was a poor description. She was what you would expect to find in a painting if each of the world's greatest artists added their own special technique to produce a masterpiece. Her hair was almost white, as I thought. It fell in such soft curls you wanted to bury your face in it. Each of her features were modeled exquisitely. A smooth forehead melted into alive hazel eyes, framed in the symmetrical curves of naturally brown eyebrows, studded with long, moist lashes. The dress she wore was not at all revealing, being a long-sleeved black business garb, but what it attempted to conceal was pure loveliness. Her breasts fought the dress as valiantly as they had the bathing suit. I could only imagine how the rest of her looked, since the desk blocked my vision. All this I saw in the 3 seconds it took to walk across the room. I doubt if she saw any change in my expression, but she could have sued me if she knew what went on in my mind. "Good morning, Mr. Hammer. Please sit down." Her voice was like liquid. I wondered what she could do if she put a little passion in it. Plenty, I bet. It wasn't hard to see why she was a successful psychiatrist. Here was a woman anyone could tell her troubles to. I sat down in the chair beside her, and she swung around to meet my eyes with a steady, direct gaze. "I presume you were here on police business?" "Not exactly. I'm a private detective." "Oh." When she said that, her voice held none of the usual contempt or curiosity I find when I tell that to someone. Instead, it was as if I had given her a pertinent piece of information. "Is it about the death of Mr. Williams?" she asked. "Uh-huh. He was a close buddy of mine. I'm conducting a sort of personal investigation of my own." She looked at me quizzically at first, and then, "Oh, yes, I read your statement in the papers. As a matter of fact, I attempted to analyze your reasoning. I've always been interested in things of that sort." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Charlotte surprised me. "I'm afraid I justify you, although several of my former professors would condemn me if I made that statement public." I saw what she meant. There's a school of thought that believes anyone who kills is the victim of a moment's insanity, no matter what the reason for the killing. "How can I help you?" she went on. "By answering a few questions. First, what time did you get to the party that night?" "Roughly about 11. I was held up by a visit to a patient." "And what time did you leave?" "Around 1. We left together." "Then where did you go?" "I had my car downstairs. Esther and Mary Bellamy drove with me. We went to the chicken bar and had a sandwich. We left there at 1:45. I remember the time because we were the only ones there, and they were getting ready to close at 2. I dropped the twins off at their hotel, then went straight to my apartment. I reached there about 2:15. I remember the time there too, since I had to reset my alarm clock." "Anybody see you come into the apartment?" Charlotte gave me the cutest little laugh. "Yes, Mr. District Attorney. My maid. She even tucked me into bed as usual. She would have heard me go out, too, for the only door to my apartment has a chime on it that rings whenever the door opens, and Kathy is a very light sleeper." I couldn't help but grin at that. "Has Pat Chambers been here to see you already?" "This morning, but much earlier." She laughed again. Shivers went through me when she did that. She radiated sex in every manner and gesture. "What is more," she continued, "he came, He saw, and he suspected. By now, he must be checking my story. Pat's not letting any grass grow under his feet, I mused. Did he mention me at all? Not a word. A very thorough man. He represents efficiency. I like him. One thing more. When did you make the acquaintance of Jack Williams? I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to reveal that. I shook my head. If it was in reference to Myrna, you needn't be. I was on the ground floor there. She seemed surprised at that, but I knew Jack had kept the entire affair of Myrna's past as close to his vest as possible. Well, she said, that was it. He called me in under advice from a doctor to attend Myrna. She had suffered a severe shock. I doubt if you can comprehend what it means to one addicted to narcotics to go cold turkey, as they call it. It means an immediate and complete removal from the source of the drug. The mental strain is terrific. They have violent convulsions. Their bodies endure the most racking pain there is. Nerve ends eaten raw are exposed to unbelievable torture, and you can give them no relief. Quite often, they destroy themselves in fits of madness. The cure is far from an easy one. Having made the decision, they're separated from outside contact in padded cells. During the earlier stages of it, they change their minds and beg to be given the drug. Later, the pain and tension mount to such dizzy heights that they're completely irrational. All the while, their body fights the effects of the drug, and it emerges finally either cured or unfit to continue life. In Myrna's case, she lived through it. Jack was worried what this would do to her mentally and called me. I treated her while she was undergoing the cure and afterwards. Since she was released, I have never visited her in a professional capacity. Well, I guess that's all then. I do have some other things I'd like to discuss with you about the case, but I want to do a little checking first. She gave me another of those smiles. Any more of them, and she'd find out what it was like to be kissed from under a set of whiskers. If it's about the time element of my story, or should I say alibi, then I suggest you hurry over to my apartment before my maid goes on her weekly shopping spree. The woman knew all the answers. I tried to keep my face straight, but it was too much work. I broke out my lopsided grin and picked up my hat. Now that's partly it. Guess I don't trust anybody. Charlotte rose and gave me the look at her legs I'd been waiting for. I understand, she remarked. To a man, friendship is a much greater thing than to a woman. Especially when that friend gave an arm to save my life, I said. A puzzled frown creased her forehead. So you're the one. It was almost a gasp. I didn't know, but I'm glad I do now. I've heard so much about you from Jack, but they were stories in the third person. He never mentioned a thing about his arm, although Myrna later told me why he lost it. Jack didn't want to embarrass me, but that's only part of the reason why I'm going to get his murderer. He was my friend even before that. I hope you get him, she said sincerely. I truly hope you do. I will, I said. We stood there a moment, just looking at each other. Then I caught myself. I have to leave now. I'll see you soon. Her breath seemed to catch in her throat a moment before she said softly, Very soon, I trust. I was hoping that light in her eyes meant what I thought it did when she said it. I parked a few feet away from the blue canopy of the apartment house. The doorman, for once conservatively dressed, opened the door of my car without wrinkling his mouth in disgust. I gave him a nod and went into the outer foyer. The name over the bell was stamped in aluminum. Manning, Charlotte, it read, without a series of degrees following it, like the doctors below. That guy must have had a letter complex. I rang the bell and walked in when the buzzer sounded. She lived on the 4th floor, in a suite facing the street. A coal black maid in a white uniform answered the door. Mr. Hammer? She asked me. Yeah, how did you know? The police gentleman's in the front room was suspecting you. Come in, please. Sure enough, there was Pat sprawled in a chair by the window. Hi, Mike, he called. I threw my hat on an end table and sat down on a hassock beside him. What did you find, Pat? Her story checks. A neighbor saw her come in at the proper time. Her maid confirmed it. For once, I was relieved. I knew you'd be along, so I just parked the carcass until you showed up. By the way, I wish you'd be a little easier on the men I detailed to keep track of you. Easier, hell. Keep 'em off my neck. Either that or get an expert. Just for your own protection, Mike. Nuts. You know me better than that. I can take care of myself. Pat let his head fall back and closed his eyes. I looked around the room. Like her office, Charlotte Manning's apartment was furnished in excellent taste. It had a casual air that made it look lived in, yet everything was in order. It wasn't large. Then, too, it had no reason to be. Living alone with one maid, a few rooms was all that was necessary. Several good paintings adorned the walls, hanging above shelves that were well stocked with books of all kinds. I noticed one bookcase that held nothing but volumes on psychology. At one end of the room, a framed diploma was the only ornament. A wide hallway opened off the living room and led to a bedroom and the kitchen, with a bathroom opposite. Beside the foyer was the maid's room. Here, the color scheme was not conducive to mental peace, but designed to add color and gaiety to its already beautiful occupant. Directly opposite the hassock I was parked on was a sofa, a full 6 feet long. It gave me ideas, which I quickly ignored. It was no time to play wolf. Yet. I nudged Pat with my foot. Hey, don't let's be going to sleep, chum. You're on taxpayers' time. He came out of his reverie with a start. Only giving you time to size things up, Junior. Let's roll. Kathy the maid came scurrying in when she heard us making sounds of leaving. She opened the door for us, and I heard the sound of the chimes Charlotte had spoken of. Does the gong go off when the bell rings, too? I asked her. Yes, sir. Or when the door opened, too. Why? Well, sir, when I's not to home, Miss Charlotte has to answer the door. Sometime when she busy in the black room, the bell ring and she just open the lock. Then when the visitors come up, she know when they come in. She can't leave in the middle of her work in the black room to answer both the bell and the door. I looked at Pat and he looked at me. What's the black room? I practically demanded. Kathy jumped like she was shot. Why, where she make pictures from the films, she answered. Pat and I left feeling a little foolish. So Charlotte made a hobby of photography. I reminded myself to brush up on details so we'd have something to speak about the next time we met. Besides that, I mean.
And that was Chapter 4 of Mickey-Spillane's Mike Hammer in I, the Jury. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.